Welcome to Queer Link, episode 22. My name is Ree. I use they, them pronouns. Today, I'm speaking with Maia Kobabe, who is the author of the graphic novel Genderqueer, a memoir which was released in May of 2019. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Of course. So tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, as you said, my name is Maia Kobabe. I use the pronouns em, air. I'm a full-time writer, illustrator of comics. I also have done some illustration work for prose novels. Uh, and I love talking and thinking about gender and queerness and sexuality and identity. So I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I could kind of imagine that a lot of folks who have read and visually gone through your book have helped and discovered something of their own or something they didn't realize. When creating this memoir, did you kind of uncover parts of yourself you didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hope that people learn things about themselves reading it. Like that was a big part of my goal was to use this book, which is about my life, to help give other people like language and vocabulary and sort of concepts to think about themselves and like start those conversations, with their own family and their own community.
Mhm.
I think when I was writing it, one thing was that I sort of more deeply recalled memories that I hadn't thought about in a long time. I actually reread all of my teenage diaries in the process of writing this memoir. And so there were a lot of things that I just, happened to me when I was like 13, 14. I was like, wow, I haven't thought about that in years. So it was sort of bringing things back up to the surface, I guess you could say. And
Mhm.
then the other thing that I didn't expect was like how at peace I would feel once all of this information was sort of out in the public. Because prior
Mhm.
to publishing this book, I definitely would have described myself as a shy person or as a reserved person.
Mhm.
And I talk about this in the book, but up until like grad school, though I was out as queer, I was not out about gender. And I was very uncomfortable talking about that. And I really didn't bring it up with anyone. It seemed very private, very secret, very confusing. I'm probably you can relate to this.
Mhm.
And but when I finally decided I want to speak openly about this, it just was like a weight that was lifted off my shoulders. And that is definitely
Mhm.
something I was not expecting, but was wonderful.
And did you journal when you were younger?
I journal extensively. I got my first journal when I was, I think, 12 years old, and I wrote somewhere between once a week to maybe almost every day, depending how much was going on in my life,
Mhm.
until I was like 24, so for like 12 years. And then right at like the probably the most stressful period of my life when I needed the most, I stopped for a couple of years. And I
Mhm.
didn't journal when I was in grad school and going through some really heavy life stuff.
Mhm.
And then a couple of years ago, I picked up the habit again and I've got back to it. So
Mm.
I think journaling's it's really important and I recommend it to like everyone, honestly.
And did the people kind of around you, just who you wrote about in terms of like just friends and family, how was kind of their reaction to the book and like just hearing about themselves?
Yeah, well, everyone who appears in the book by name got to see the pages that they were appeared in before the book was published. So I showed people drafts. I especially my family and close friends, I let people read over their scenes and give me feedback in case there was anything that was like they didn't feel comfortable with, or if people, I gave people a chance to say, that's not how I remember it, that kind of thing. Because it was important to me that this book not like break any of my relationships or burn bridges. I really wanted this to be a book that connected me to people and that built like communication and connection. So it was very important for me for that no one be shocked or surprised by appearing in this book. Um, but overall, people, I mean, most of my family's feedback has been very positive, very supportive. Some people were generally said like, "Oh, I loved like learning more about you." Other people were a little bit
Mhm.
more on the neutral side of just like, "Congrats on being published." You know what I mean? So, but like even my grandmother, who was in her 80s, read the book, and one of the
Mhm.
things that she said was, "I wish I had like I wish there'd been more open talk about like puberty and sexuality and body stuff when I was a teen," because she was like, I didn't talk about any of this. Like nobody talked to me about this when I was young." And I was like, "Yeah, I think that's really important too, grandma."
And just how was it having those conversations, I guess, just with your parents? And do you feel like it opened like a new dialogue between you?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been pretty close with my parents. I'm very blessed to have supportive, loving parents who I actually still live with in my 30s. Um, but it definitely opened up sort of new avenues of conversation. I remember one of the things my mom said reading an early draft of the book was, wow, I didn't realize you'd been thinking about all of this for so long.
Mm,
I think because I only started talking about it when I was like in grad school, and she didn't realize I'd been thinking about it literally since I was a child. So that was definitely a new thing for us to speak about.
it's interesting that they say that, but then as a kid, I don't know, with you or me, like I couldn't even imagine having a conversation like
Oh, yeah. No,
that.
no, no. No, no, no. I definitely was not ready to talk about this stuff too. Like, I mean, that's why I waited. I mean, writing the book when I was like, I think I was either 26 or 27, and it was published in the same month as my 30th birthday. So, and I wasn't really ready to talk about it any earlier than that, honestly.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean that's okay, right? Because then
It's
you get to
fine.
have those now.
Everyone in their own time. You know, there's no deadline on this stuff. It's all of us. I mean, we spend our whole lives figuring out who we are. I'm sure I'll figure out more things, and when I'm 40, I'll have probably a whole another book's worth of stories and self-knowledge. I hope, right? Because I feel
Definitely.
like if you stop learning about yourself, you kind of get stuck. And
Mhm.
I don't want to be stuck. I want to keep growing and changing and
Mm.
living.
Since your first publishing Genderqueer, how has it been going?
I mean, it's been amazing. This book has been so much more kindly and enthusiastically received than I expected. I don't even know that I had expectations, honestly. Like
Mm.
I had wanted to be published since I was very young. Since I was very young, I knew I wanted to write books long before I knew I had anything to say or to write about. Um and so I think I was so looking forward to just it being published and there being a copy in the world that I could hold that I almost didn't really think about what came after that. Um, but the first printing of the book, which was just 5,000 copies, sold out the week that it was released, and they ordered a reprint immediately. I believe it's on either its fourth or fifth printing in the US, and it has been translated into Spanish, and it has, I believe, run through at least its first Spanish printing. And just this week, we announced the Czech edition and the Polish edition. The Czech edition is out now. The Polish one will be out in a month from when we're recording this, in March of 2021. Um, and that's just so exciting. It's really exciting to see the book going beyond, you know, just my own family and friends and community, beyond even languages that I can speak. I mean, it's amazing.
Wow, and I feel like it's so different. Yes, you have a book that's published, but it's like it's your life, and people
Yes.
just like grasping towards it, you know?
Yeah, it's my life, and now it has its own life outside of
Mm,
me.
I love that.
Yeah.
And how's kind of the book tour been with, kind of navigating COVID, right? And doing things like virtual versus public.
Yeah, well, I feel very grateful that the book came out in 2019. So I actually was able to tour physically for like sort of on and off for the second half of 2019. I visited, it debuted at the Book Expo in New York, and then I was able to do some events in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and I did San Diego Comic-Con that year, and I went to the Miami Book Fair, and I went up to Oregon and Washington, and I did mostly it was couch surfing. I was just staying, I was like, all right, what big cities do I have friends in that have bookstores? Let's go.
Very good.
And that was, really, really fulfilling. And I'm so glad I did it. It was also exhausting. It meant that like when the pandemic hit, I was like, I'm actually really ready to not leave my house for a while. And I feel like at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like almost like, oh wow, like an excuse to not leave the house. I actually need this.
Mhm.
Of course I began chafing at it fairly quickly, but I felt like because I got to do some of the in-person stuff, it meant that when people started reaching out for Zoom things, I was like, oh yeah, I would love to talk over Zoom. I'd love to be able to speak to you from my own bedroom, you know, to wherever you are. And
Exactly.
yeah, I've done a lot of virtual talks. I've done some for libraries. I've done some for high school, like GSA groups, specifically classes on either gender studies, queer studies, or some literature or comics studies type classes. And that's been really wonderful. I feel like in general, the students will have read the book before I come in, and
Mhm.
they usually have really good questions. The students usually have really like thoughtful, interesting, like really engaged questions. So I love
Is
that.
Do you have one that's just off the top of your head, maybe that you remember? I'm putting you
Oh
on
my
the spot
gosh.
here.
Well, I will say a lot of people ask me what happens right after the last scene in the book, which I should have maybe guessed. The last scene is quite open-ended. It's a scene of me teaching a group of young students and contemplating coming out to my students and what it would mean to be out in the classroom, and whether that's too political, or
Mm,
whether that would be distracting from the curriculum that I'm teaching, or meaningful, being like a role model to young people in the classroom, which I didn't have when I was young.
mm,
And it kind of ends on this question of like, well, will I come out next time? Next time, will I speak up? And so a lot of people ask me like, so did you, did you? And the answer is kind of like yes and no, because I've done a lot of teaching, and sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. And it was very dependent on many factors, including, how old the students were and how long I was going to be with them and how safe I felt in the school and like lots of things. But
of course.
many people ask about that.
And as you said, you're talking in front of classrooms, university and colleges have asked you to come and participate. Did you ever kind of think you'd be in that position? Is that kind of exciting to like talk in front of a classroom?
I definitely did not expect this book to begin a speaking career at all. No. But it's cool. I mean, I like it. It's mostly just exciting that people want to read it. It's exciting that something that felt so personal and so individual to my experience actually seems to be relatable to more people than I would have expected, including people who aren't even queer or trans people. I
Mm,
have cis readers reach out to me and say, like, I didn't realize there was going to be so much about like romance, or so much about
mm,
relationships, or so much about like periods, or they'll
mm.
find something in it that speaks to them often, or at least the people who find it like let me know sometimes. Yeah, so I especially like talking to students. I would say that's probably the most fulfilling of the talks that I've done, has been with students.
I can imagine. And it's something you said before that kind of sparked interest to me when you meet people that they kind of know everything about you and you know nothing about them. How kind of has
Yeah.
that shift been for you?
It's been interesting. Mostly it's either good or neutral. I wouldn't say it's ever really bad, but it definitely has happened that I've been, specifically when I was more doing in-person events, and I'd say be a book signing, and somebody would come up to me and then sort of immediately begin talking to me on a fairly like intimate and deep level, which I appreciate. I don't love this. I find small talk very boring, and I would actually rather get quite quickly to like, oh, how do you feel about your body? What is your relationship with your parents like? You know what I mean? I would rather get to those heftier topics quickly in a friendship. But when people come up and yeah, they know a lot of stuff about me, but I don't know anything about them yet, there's kind of, it feels a little unbalanced. So
Mm,
sometimes I have to sort of like just listen for a while and then sort of ask some leading questions like, well, what, how does that relate to you? Or, what do you do? Where did you grow up? How does that affect how you feel about things? Like, did you
mm.
feel comfortable when you were a child in your home, in your city, in your school? And I kind of like need to almost build up like a certain amount of like autobiographical and emotional information about the other person that I'm speaking to, and before we like then can sort of like meet as like equal level friends.
Of course. I hear that you're kind of writing something else right now.
Yeah.
And do you kind of want to give us a little insight about what's going on?
Yeah, I am excited to be working on another graphic novel. It's been a minute. I definitely,
Mm,
after publishing this book and then touring and then the pandemic, I was very tired. I was very tired and I didn't do very much for like a year.
mhm,
But then I got another brainwave, which was to write a fictional story, but that is also about a gender nonconforming young person struggling with a lot of the same things that I struggled with, which is like, puberty and friendship drama and coming of age and feelings at that sort of like junior high age. So the character is in sixth grade at the beginning of the book and it goes into the seventh grade year.
mm,
And, but I felt like writing it as fiction would free me up to honestly to tidy the story up more and like have the narrative arcs resolve in a more satisfying or complete fashion than actually happened in real life.
mhm,
And then I was very honored and excited to be joined in it with a co-writer who's a very good friend of mine, Lucky Srikumar, who's another non-binary cartoonist, who
Mhm.
initially was consulting on the book with me about including a Desi character, Indian American character in the story. And my initial thought had been, oh, it could be one of the close friends of the main character. And Lucky read over the script and was like, what if it was the main character though? And I was
Mm.
like, wow, galaxy brain. I love this idea.
Yeah.
But I obviously am a white person. I don't feel comfortable writing a book with a POC main character unless you are interested in maybe joining me as a co-author in the book and can consult more heavily and be like more intimately involved with it, with the book's development. And Lucky said yes. So now we're working on it together. And I'm very delighted by the character who is now kind of like a Steven Universe fusion of me in junior high and Lucky in junior high, like merged together. Um, and yeah, I've written the full script. I'm in thumbnails. We're designing the character designs. I've showed early drafts to my agent. She's enthusiastic about it, but there's also like a long way to go. So we'll
Of
see.
course. Oh, that's so exciting. And what an awesome story. I just can't wait to read and visually see it.
Yeah,
How was
me
your
same.
how was your process kind of as an author, just kind of writing? And do you write first and then draw, I'm assuming, or kind of both?
Yeah. Um for for a short piece, a lot of short comics that either go up on Instagram. Sometimes I've been published on the Nib. I've been published on the New Yorker and some anthologies. If it's a very short story, I sometimes kind of write and draw at the same time, or I'll thumbnail as I write it. You know, if it's something that's like less than 10 pages. For something as long as a book, I will write a typed script.
Mhm.
Kind of, it's not like a full-fledged, I'm not writing like a prose novel and then turning it to a comic. It's more like I'm writing a play script or even like a bullet point list of like action, action, dialogue, 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 action, action. Because I know I'm going to be drawing it. So I don't have to write these like bulky paragraphs of description of what like people look like or what they're doing or what the scene looks like because I'm going to be drawing that later. So the script is really more of all the dialogue plus like stage directions.
What an interesting process. This is my first ever graphic novel reading.
I'm so excited. There are so many other good ones. Please let me give you some book recs after this talk
Yes,
because there
please.
are so many good graphic novels right now. The
Mm,
memoir genre is blossoming and there are a lot of queer stories. And I think one of the things that makes comics really a powerful tool, especially for queer and trans people, is the fact that we can draw ourselves however we want and being
mm,
able to control how the viewer sees
yeah.
us, perceives us. Very powerful, I would say, for a
I
trans
really
author.
I really enjoyed that, like with going through your book, because I saw exactly what through your lens in a sense, right?
Mm.
And how I was my mom actually just visited me, and I showed her how you described your parents and like how you drew them and like little notes about them. I thought that was very sweet, and so did she. Uh,
Yeah,
but yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think just yeah, it's so different than just reading a regular book. So I really just appreciate all that work, and I bet so many other people too of um, just learning about different way queer people experiences our world.
yeah.
Is there a question that you've been maybe wanting to answer that you haven't had the opportunity to yet?
So one question I always hope people will ask is, should I write a memoir? Because my answer is yes. I think that every single person in the world, their story is interesting enough to be a memoir. And I don't think every single person wants to write a memoir or should be like required to. But I
Mm,
think if there's anyone who has been feeling the call of memoir or feeling the call to write about their own experience, I think you should go for it.
mm,
And I think this is especially true of anyone from any kind of community. If you are queer, or if you're a person of color, if you're an immigrant, if you're literally anything other than sort of the default, white cis heteronormative male default media view of the mainstream stories that we get, especially here in the US. I think that stories from outside point of views are really important, really meaningful, both for the person telling it, for the people inside that same sort of small community, and the people outside of it. I think it's beneficial to all of those types of readers. Um, I know I personally have found writing memoir very cathartic and very rewarding, and it has connected me to people in ways that my earlier fiction work like really never did.
Mhm.
And the one thing I'll say is that of course nobody from any marginalized communities owes their story to the sort of the dominant culture. And if it feels re-traumatizing to maybe retell your story, if there's some hard grief, then you shouldn't do it. You should only do it if it feels good and it feels like truth telling and it feels powerful. But if anyone listening to this has considered memoir and has had maybe doubts or
Mhm.
reservations, I want this to be like the little sign from the universe that says, yes, like go for it. You should do it. You should tell your story. It's really important. I'd love to read it.
I'm gonna take that as a sign for myself too.
You should. Please, please do.
I have a question for you for maybe for any young writers. How do you kind of go from just your book to kind of getting published? Do you have any advice just in that area?
Hmm. Everyone's route to getting published is different, and is unfortunately often people take very circuitous routes. For me, I actually started self all of my earlier work was either published online as a web comic,
Mhm.
or I printed zine versions, just little small, often like no sheet of paper. I did a lot of self-publishing. And then I started to pitch to anthologies. There are a lot of, especially in comics, a lot of people putting together books with stories by many authors and then funding them on Kickstarter and getting them out that way. So
Mhm.
I was published in like at least 10 books that were printed via Kickstarter before I was ever published by like a sort of a publisher, pop proper. Um, so my main pieces of advice would be start with short stories, things that you can finish, write poems or write essays, write
Mhm.
short pieces, and see if you can find online venues who will publish and maybe pay you a little bit to start with. And then once you've kind of built that out, that will also, at first, it'll hone your voice. And second, it will also introduce you to people. And because this is the thing, is a lot of the way people get published is by knowing someone, right?
Mhm.
So the way I got my book deal after I had been self-publishing and publishing online and been anthologies for 5 or 6 years, I went to grad school, and then one of my grad school classmates got a publishing deal, and then he thought his editor would like my work, so he sent my work to his editor, and she liked it. So I got kind of like an invitation or an introduction by
Mhm.
somebody I knew got a deal, so then he kind of helped me get a deal. And there is a lot of that, like it
Word
really
of
helps
mouth.
to have friends and community who are also writers and also publishing in the same field you want to publish. So if they see something, if they meet someone who they think would love your work, they can connect you. um so yeah, for me, definitely, I want to say that you don't have to go to grad school. You absolutely do not have to go to school to be a writer. The main benefit of going to grad school, I would say, honestly, is gaining community, is meeting other people who are as
Mhm.
serious and committed about it as you are. But I also think you can meet people like other ways. You can meet people through going to book signings or author talks or even like Zoom talks. You can do it by joining a writing group. You can do it
Mhm.
by, following writers online and following writers social media, especially finding somebody who you feel like is like just only 1 or 2 steps
Mhm.
more ahead in their career than you are. So
Mhm.
don't reach out to somebody who has published like 90 books. Reach
Mhm.
out to somebody who has published like a really good essay,
Mhm.
but maybe who doesn't have a book out. And or if you have several essays out, reach out to somebody who just had their first essay collection published, and ask them like, hey, so like, how did you collect these pieces? I love this book, like how did that happen? And reach out to somebody who you feel like is like, yeah, 2 to 3 years ahead of you in your career, and see what sort of early steps they had, and then
Mhm.
see if it makes sense for you to follow some of those sort of early steps. Especially another thing about not reaching out to somebody who's super well established is it
Mhm.
means they got started a long time ago, and they got started is like totally out of date now, right? So
Mhm.
that is another actually problem of grad school, is there's definitely some of the teachers I had in grad school, they talk about how they got their first book deal, and it was like, I was like, what, you pitch to a print magazine? There aren't print magazines anymore. Or you know what I mean? Just something
Yeah,
that
yeah,
just
yeah.
seemed like totally out of step with like the year that we were in.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I would say start with short pieces and self-publish and publish in small venues, and then work
Mhm.
your way up and build community and
Mhm.
find a mentor if you can. If you want to go to school and you can afford it, it will shorten your learning curve, but it is not required.
Thank you so much for that. I'm just like, I'm trying to check all those little boxes you just said. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on QueerLink. I really appreciate just hearing about your novel, hearing about your work, and just your process of it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to QueerLink's YouTube channel.